Joining us now is Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds, a member of the House Financial Services Committee and the House Republican Steering Committee. Speaker McCarthy, Congressman, has said that there is no deal without work requirements for people on food programs and other relief programs. Is that also your bottom line?
It's that in conjunction with everything else that the House passed. That's my bottom line. I mean, look, Andrea, here's the key situation. Everybody's known that the debt ceiling was going to expire sometime in June or July. It's not been a secret. And so while House Republicans have painstakingly gone through the process of examining our spending, examining other solutions, we crafted a policy in the House of Representatives. During that time period, not quite sure what the president or Chuck Schumer were doing, and it's really unfortunate that we're at this position right now.
If it turns out that the Speaker can only avoid a default with an agreement that can get some Democratic votes to pass, could that cost him his speakership, according to the Freedom Caucus?
Listen, that's a very loaded question. If anybody's driving us to default, it's Joe Biden. And the simple reason is he hasn't really done anything. He released his budget a month late, by the way. It was a month late. It's a $7 trillion budget when we only raise about $4.2 to $4.5 trillion in taxes every year. And he's not done anything else. So if you're the leader of the free world, if you're the chief executive of our country, shouldn't you have come together with a proposal at some point? He's not done that. So it's not an issue of Kevin McCarthy and what he hasn't done. It's really an issue of Joe Biden and what he has not done.
Well, we are where we are, and apparently over the weekend there was some give. They're not talking about it publicly for obvious reasons, but there were some cuts, for instance, turning back the COVID relief funds, making some other trims. Have you heard anything behind the scenes that leads you to think that there could possibly be a compromise? Would you go along with anything, such as what you're hearing from your fellow members and from the Speaker?
Listen, I've heard a little bit about COVID, unspent COVID money, but, you know, the American people need to understand unspent COVID money is about $50 billion, maybe $40 billion at this point. There was, or unobligated COVID money, let me say it very directly. There was obligated COVID money that did not need to go out. That was about $500 billion. And, you know, the president, because he decided to end the pandemic on May 11th, you know, basically a year after the pandemic was really over, just so that money could go out the door. That was really reckless and disheartening in my view. But in terms of any structural agreements, none of that has really happened. There's stuff that both sides are kind of saying, okay, yeah, we agree on that. But that's really small stuff. You're talking about anywhere from a $1.5 trillion raise in our national debt or higher, because I think Joe Biden wants more. And if you're going to do that, we really need to tighten the screws financially here on Capitol Hill.
Why do Republicans with Democratic support, in fact, vote for at least two debt relief raises under President Trump?
Well, a couple things. One, I wasn't a member of Congress at the time, so I'm not sure what the dynamics were on Capitol Hill. Two, my recollection is that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they negotiated with Donald Trump on this well in advance. It was never really an issue. Now, let's make sure I bring up point number two very clearly. Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi negotiated over this long in advance, so there wasn't this brinksmanship that we're seeing. What's happened here, and it's really sad, Andrea, and frankly, it's indicative of the lack of leadership from the president, is that issues are ignored until they hit a crisis point. Joe Biden has known about this. He could have negotiated it. And I will also add, Joe Biden could have raised the debt ceiling when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. That was 6 months ago.
Sir, there were no spending cuts in those agreements. The Republicans went along with it without any strings tied to it.
Well, you also got to remember, our national debt wasn't also $31.5 trillion at the time. Our actual debt, our spending trajectory was a lot lower than it is right now under Joe Biden. And frankly, even the last year of President Trump, because of the response to COVID-19. We spent a lot of money out here in Capitol Hill. A lot of money went out to a lot of states and localities. And now that the pandemic over, it's time to get back to pre-COVID spending levels. That's simple, common sense stuff that House Republicans are bringing to this conversation about our national debt.
I could say, what about getting back to pre-Trump tax cut spending levels? It was not just COVID. It was the giant tax cut under President Trump that the Republicans pushed through. So, you know, there was a lot of debt that was accumulated, but the debt that we're talking about is not the debt from last year. It's the debt that goes back to the founding of our country. That's how many years of debt has been accumulated in the ceiling that has to be raised. It's not last year's spending or the years before spending. Or this
Andrea,
year's spending.
a couple of things on that point. Number one, the Trump tax cuts actually helped us raise more revenue than we ever have in the history of our country. CBO scored the Trump tax cuts as a decrease in federal revenue. The opposite has actually happened. Federal revenue is higher than CBO actually predicted. That's point number one. Now, on to the actual debt. The $31.5 trillion that we already have obligated, that's already out in the Treasury markets, that's actually the debt and the borrowings of our country throughout its entire existence. Raising the national debt now, what that actually allows the federal government to do is to continue its spending on all the various agencies going forward. So what my colleagues in the House are saying is, listen, we know we're going to have to borrow money. We know we're going to spend money, but let's reduce the spending speed, the velocity, the expansion back to pre-COVID levels. It's really simple stuff. And the last thing I'll say on that is, if you take Barack Obama's last budget in 2016, our spending levels are in line with Obama's last budget from 2016, something that I'm quite sure Joe Biden supported when he was vice president of the United States.
I think we could have a longer debate on another time, about supply-side economics and whether the Trump tax cuts were funded. Okay. Congressman Byron Donalds, we really appreciate your coming on. It's a good conversation. Let's continue it another time. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.